Well, edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. A few days ago on Face the Nation, host Bob Schiffer interviewed Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State under Bill Clinton. In his first question, he asked, "Can you recall a time when there was so much trouble in so many different places around the world?" They discussed a variety of hot spots, including Gaza, Russia, Ukraine, Libya, where the U.S. had to evacuate its embassy last week, and Syria, which Schiffer characterized as just a slaughterhouse, apparently. He said, "It's almost like we're caught up in events out of control." Albright gave an answer everyone can understand. To put it mildly, she said, "The world is a mess." Jesus likened the world near the end of the church age to a woman in labor. Contractions come and go, but with each one getting stronger and coming closer together. Last week, President Barack Obama went on a fundraising tour of the West. He did something you rarely hear a president do at a fundraiser. He said something important. He spoke of an anxiety hanging over the people of the world and explained it like this. Part of people's concern is just the sense that around the world, the old order isn't holding, and we're not quite yet where we need to be in terms of a new order that's based on a different set of principles. I think that sums it up. The old order isn't holding. People feel the old foundations crumbling beneath their feet. Something new is coming, a new order based on a different set of principles. That's also what the Bible predicts. In fact, it's amazing how much the Bible has to say about the time which we're living. You may be new to Bible prophecy, or you may have grown up hearing verses about the end of this age, about wars, rumors of wars, pestilences, earthquakes in divers places, about perilous times when men would be despisers of those that are good, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. Many of you learned from pulpits decades ago the things that professional futurists are only now beginning to understand. You heard about coming technology that would allow a small cadre of men to rule the world at a minute level, even to the point of being able to determine who could or could not buy even a cup of coffee. Such technology now exists. We've got wars, and boy, do we have rumors of war. Russia is a nation with at least 10,000 nuclear warheads, and their leader, Vladimir Putin, seems to have stopped caring what the rest of the world thinks. He seems to think it no longer matters. Even with all the heat he's taking over shooting down the Malaysian airliner, and with more sanctions threatened by the United States and Europe, he still has his soldiers actively firing on Ukraine from Russia. What does the world do if a nation with 10,000 nukes goes rogue? Time magazine called it Cold War II and suggested we're losing. There's the Russian war against Ukraine, that we can see, but behind that lurks a rumor of war, nuclear war, war on a scale never seen before in the history of the world. And that's just one hot spot. The P5+1 countries, led by the United States, recently extended Iran's deadline for a negotiated resolution regarding its nuclear program. A few days later, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, announced his solution for the Gaza crisis. He said, "Israel's annihilation is the only real cure." Judging by the present agreement with Iran, it looks as if their quest for a nuclear bomb will continue uncontested, at least by the P5+1 nations. It's interesting that the extension lasts until just after the midterm elections in the U.S. North Korea is rattling its saber again. Kim Jong-un is proving to be an even less stable leader than his father, and North Korea rattles a very real saber. They have atomic weapons and missiles that can carry them throughout much of Asia, including Japan and South Korea, maybe even Hawaii. There have always been wars and rumors of wars, but as the nuclear club expands, the danger to the world is expanding geometrically. The world has never been in such a peril as it is now, with the most unstable leaders and regimes gaining possession of deliverable nuclear weapons. Bible prophecy predicts in Revelation chapter 9 and 16 that the kings of the East, led, we believe now, by China, will suddenly wipe out a third of the Earth's population once war breaks out in the Middle East during the tribulation. This war will be provoked when Gog from the land of Magog, or Russia, spoken of in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, will lead a Muslim coalition headed by Iran into an assault upon Israel and the Middle East. I've been warning of this series of catastrophic events and its players for over 55 years. Now the exact conditions are clearly before us. We can even see why the various powers will have reason to attack. Jesus also said there would be famines. The world now lives on the brink of food shortages and catastrophes that could come from any one of several looming problems. But even without such catastrophes, just in the normal course of events, 1 billion people in the world go to bed hungry every night. Jesus said to look for an increase in earthquakes, and he specifically said, in diverse places. Earthquake maps of the United States and several other countries have changed dramatically, with strong earthquakes occurring in places where only 5 years ago no one ever remembered feeling one. Diverse places. Jesus said all of this would be merely the beginning of birth pangs. Folks, let there be no doubt. The water has broken. Labor has begun. Contractions are now strong and close. The birth is near. The world's a mess, but there is a new world coming. If you believe it's important to warn the world about the dangers of Islam, to call America to repentance for its breathtaking moral decline, and to awaken the church to the reality of Christ's soon return, then I need your help. These are the goals of the Hal Lindsey Report, but I cannot do it alone. Please be a part of this worldwide ministry. Send your tax-deductible contributions to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74147. You can also visit hallindsey.com or phone toll-free 1-888-RAPTURE. Your support will guarantee the continued growth of this television program, and together we can touch the world. The Bible gives scores of specific conditions for the approach of the last days, and they're here. But the great theme of the last days prophecy has always centered on the nation of Israel and a relatively small parcel of ground known as Jerusalem. And the most strategic piece of real estate on earth is the 35 acres in Jerusalem on which Israel's Temple Mount was originally built. God predicted 3,000 years ago that Israel would rebel against him, be driven from their sacred land, and dispersed throughout the world. He also said that near the end, he would bring them back to their land, and he would bring Jerusalem back under their control. The Jews returned as a nation in 1948, and against all odds became a nation. And then Jerusalem came under their control in 1967, in direct fulfillment of prophecy. Psalm 2 asks, why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? Satan seems determined to make God a liar by destroying Israel, and so the heathen rage. They rage against Israel, against Israel's control of Jerusalem, and worst of all, against the God of the entire universe. It's important to note that Israel's present battle with Hamas is different from those they've fought before. And it's not just that the weapons on both sides are more sophisticated and dangerous. This time, there's a different attitude among the Israelis. 80% of them support the incursion into Gaza, and 71% say Israel should expand its operation to eliminate further threats from Hamas. When the Israeli Security Cabinet rebuffed U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's ceasefire proposal last week, even dovish politicians like Tzipi Livni joined in the unanimous rejection. I think what's different this time is that Israelis are fed up with hypocrisy, and they know their survival is at stake. Hamas strikes Israel with terrorist weapons, then hides those weapons in civilian neighborhoods while claiming to care about those civilians. That's the height of hypocrisy. The nations of the world condemn Israel for basic acts of self-defense, acts that are amazingly restrained. Virtually the whole world refuses to acknowledge Israel's unprecedented attempts to limit civilian casualties, even though these attempts put their own soldiers at greater risk. There is no record in history of any nation using such restraint when it is under attack by enemies sworn to annihilate it. Instead, condemnation comes to Israel for doing what any other country would do in similar circumstances. That's unprecedented hypocrisy. Israelis have experienced this treatment for years, and they're fed up. They know the history. They know how much they've sacrificed for a peace that seems more remote now than before they made those sacrifices. They know how hard they've tried, and they know they're not Nazis. Nowadays, that's the word that keeps popping up regarding Israel. Jews are being equated with Nazis. It started in 1967 in the bowels of Pravda, the old Soviet propaganda machine, and it hasn't stopped. Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Erdogan criticized the invasion of Gaza with these words: "Those who condemn Hitler day and night have surpassed Hitler in barbarism." Former Pink Floyd singer Roger Waters, a longtime critic of Israel, recently told Counterpunch magazine, "The situation in Israel-Palestine with the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, and the systematic racist apartheid Israeli regime is unacceptable." Look at all those buzzwords and false comparisons. Occupation? What occupation? Israel removed its people from Gaza, including soldiers, back in 2005. Ethnic cleansing? That's a phrase meaning either the expulsion or genocide of an entire people. Israel expelled all Jews, their own citizens, from Gaza, not Palestinians. He went on to say, there were many people that pretended that the oppression of the Jews was not going on from 1933 until 1946, so this is not a new scenario, except that this time it's the Palestinian people being murdered. Think about it rationally. The Nazis rounded up all the Jews they could find. They used them for unspeakable medical experiments. They threw them out of their own homes, stole all their possessions, and sent them to concentration camps, where they were gassed by the hundreds of thousands, and they threw their bodies into ovens. They lined Jews up in front of open pits so they could shoot them and bury them more efficiently. They murdered Jews, and they did it 6 million times. No one in his right mind can think that what is happening in Gaza is anything like what I just described, which raises an interesting question. Why do people believe it? Can Erdogan be sane and accuse Israel of surpassing the barbarism of Adolf Hitler? It is demonically inspired spiritual darkness. It's very real, extremely dangerous, and exactly what the prophets foretold. I'll be right back. Each week on the Hal Lindsey Report, I try to show you how today's events are bringing to life the predictions of the ancient prophets. Like a watchman on the wall, I'm warning you that time is short. Christ will soon return for his church, and I want you to be ready to go. And I want you to see how urgent it is that you make certain your family, your friends, and those around you are ready to go too. Please help me continue this work and help me take the necessary steps to broadcast the Hal Lindsey Report into more homes in America. I need your help now more than ever before.
You can support this ministry online at hallindsey.com or by calling 1-888-RAPTURE, hallindsey.com, or 1-888-RAPTURE.
Nine years ago, Israel pulled out of Gaza and gave it to the Palestinians. No negotiations, no quid pro quo. They got nothing in return. It was a unilateral action intended to jumpstart the peace process. In 2005, when the withdrawal was being debated in Israel, Knesset member Ayub Kara, an Arab, told WorldNet Daily, the withdrawal is going to be terrible for Israeli security. Hamas is going to become dominant as soon as Israel leaves Gaza, and they will use the land to stage more attacks against Israel. Hamas is already telling their supporters that Israel leaving Gaza is because of their terrorism. So they're thinking terrorism works. He was right on all points. Rocket fire from Gaza into Israel began even before the handover was completed. The Palestinian Authority blamed Hamas for the missiles. Every Jew left Gaza. They left behind millions of dollars worth of infrastructure and profitable business ready to be the foundation of a vibrant economy. For instance, they left more than 500 acres of greenhouses. American Jewish donors purchased the greenhouses from evicted settlers in order to give them to the Palestinians. NBC News said at the time, the greenhouses are a centerpiece of Palestinian plans for rebuilding Gaza. But it was goodwill to no avail. As soon as the pullout happened, Palestinian mobs began looting, burning, and otherwise vandalizing the very greenhouses that were meant for them to prosper. These greenhouses had previously given employment to thousands of their fellow Palestinians. What happened with the greenhouses happened throughout Gaza. Riots broke out everywhere. Chaos reigned. Israel wanted, even needed, the Palestinians of Gaza to succeed and prosper. They needed a secure and stable neighbor. When they pulled out of Gaza, Israel gave the Palestinians every advantage. The nations of the world poured in money, billions of dollars. But just weeks after Israel's withdrawal, the people of Gaza elected an internationally recognized terrorist group, Hamas, to govern them. And as Ayub Kara predicted, the Palestinians saw Israel's act of goodwill as capitulation to the years of terrorism that preceded it. His view was proven by a memo written by Hamas leader Mahmoud al-Zahar. The withdrawal, if it is implemented, is an important achievement by the Palestinian people. Its intifada, an armed struggle, its determination and great sacrifice, and confirms the willingness, correctness, and usefulness of employing an armed struggle and its ability to attain political objectives. In other words, to the Palestinians, the Gaza giveaway meant that their terrorism worked. Critics have called Gaza an open-air prison and compare it to the Jewish ghettos of 1930s Warsaw. But Israel and Egypt shut down their borders with Gaza in order to stop the flow of weapons and terrorists in and out of the territory. Who can blame them? Missiles and suicide bombers cannot be tolerated. Hamas insists that free borders around Gaza are a prerequisite for stopping the rocket attacks. Conversely, Israel makes stopping the rocket attacks and terror tunnels under Israel's borders a prerequisite for opening the border. For much of the world, the positions may seem equally reasonable until you realize that the rocket attacks preceded the closing of Gaza. Travel restrictions to and from Gaza did not cause the unrest. They were the result of it. When Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, they did so with following stipulations. The Gaza Strip shall be demilitarized and shall be devoid of weaponry, and the State of Israel reserves its fundamental right of self-defense, both preventive and reactive, including, where necessary, the use of force in respect of threats emanating from the Gaza Strip. Gaza has not for 1 second in the intervening years been demilitarized or without weapons. Instead of using the hundreds of millions of dollars given by Western supporters to create a thriving industrial city-state, the PLO and Hamas used the money for building a vast attack tunnel system and tens of thousands of rockets to launch against Israel's civilian population. This is why Israel now has to check all borders against terrorist smugglers of weapons. The Palestinians have forced Israel to shut borders that would have been happily open to them had they not used them to arm for annihilating Israel. In a stunning twist of logic, Israel's critics use casualty figures to determine right and wrong in the conflict. Their thinking runs like this: more Palestinians have died, therefore Israel must be the aggressor. How's that for turning logic on its head? It means that to win the propaganda war, Hamas just has to lose the fighting war. Back on July 26th, Robert Fisk, writing for The Independent, said, "If 800 Israelis had died and only 35 Palestinians, I think I know our reaction. We would call it, rightly, a slaughter, an atrocity, a crime for which the killers must be made accountable." It's absurd to think that casualty totals can possibly determine moral standing. In essence, he is saying that might makes wrong, that in a war, it doesn't matter whose cause is right, it only matters who has the most casualties. I told you about the terror tunnels last week, but there are a couple of other things we've discovered since then that you need to know. They really are terror tunnels. When the IDF started investigating them, they found bombs placed directly beneath Israeli kindergartens. Also, Hamas appears to have learned from their colleagues in the Taliban how valuable a hostage can be. The Israelis found large numbers of syringes, tranquilizers, and plastic handcuffs in most of the tunnels. They also found IDF uniforms. All of these items were to be used in kidnapping Israeli soldiers and civilians. As you've seen images of destruction from Gaza on television over the last few weeks, you probably noticed that the destruction got worse over time. That's because the Israelis learned just what they were up against in those tunnels. A few years ago, at the insistence of the United Nations, Israel began allowing construction supplies into Gaza in a greater amount, especially concrete. It was supposed to help Gazans build houses, hospitals, and businesses, but most of it was diverted for use in the tunnels. These are not simple dirt tunnels. They're fortified bunkers, and they've been built beneath civilian neighborhoods, some as much as 60 meters under the ground. It takes massive bunker-busting bombs to take out these kinds of installations, which would inevitably result in horrific collateral damage and civilian casualties. Obviously, that's part of the Hamas plan, to gain world sympathy and destroy Israel with propaganda. That's why the IDF has found it necessary to destroy the tunnels by hand, and dozens of Israeli soldiers have been killed in the process because of this. The 83rd Psalm begins with this prayer: O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent, O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They have made shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, come and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one mind against you. They make a covenant. You know, folks, it's a privilege to participate in God's kingdom and his causes. But ultimately, the battle is not yours, but God's. The Lord has himself promised that there will be a growing, dangerous, demonically inspired hatred of all Christians as the final hours of the age draw to an end. Let all who are believers now keep their ears tuned for the Lord's voice. He is about to suddenly come for us and shout, come up here. The next conscious moment, we'll be standing in heaven with him and all our believing loved ones. Good night, my beloved brothers and sisters, and God willing, I'll see you next week.